Hello and welcome. My name is Rob Simons. I'm the board president of the Downtown Chamber Series, and we have a couple of concerts coming up in early January 2025. January 4th, Saturday at 7:30 p.m., and on Sunday, January 5th at 2 p.m. And these concerts will be held at SHEPLEY BULLFINCH Architects in the so-called Punch Card Building in downtown Phoenix, which is the architectural masterpiece by the mid-century architect W.A. Sarmiento, and that we will turn that again into a concert space now for the second time. And this program, we were excited to welcome back the sort of annual return of the audience favorite pianist Evan Shinners, who was performing a program entitled J.S. Bach's Teenage Years, the earliest music from the master. That's a showcase of how innovative J.S. Bach was relative to his contemporaries in the early 1700s. So welcome, Evan.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to be here.
So, Evan, your life's work has been exploring the works of J.S. Bach, performing his music in, I would call, rigorous and scholarly and a dedicated way, but at the same time presenting the music in a way that creates understanding and affinity from contemporary audiences. Tell us about how this program is designed to shine a light on this particular part of Bach's output, maybe how it foreshadows what comes next.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think maybe like 10 years ago someone would have said just the opposite, that you're dedicated to playing Bach in a very in a less than flattering way. And later tonight I'm playing in some sort of a club. But yeah, no, I think definitely I am trying to be more serious now and scholarly. Um, but these works, so these are all works from before around 1704, so before 20 years old. And I think we tend to associate the great prodigies of music like with Mendelssohn and Mozart. But we tend to forget that Bach, and not only J.S. Bach, but his family, his siblings, his cousins, they were also so speedily they were quick learners and prodigies that really only people like Mozart would have rivaled, the 10-year-old Bach or something like this. But it's yeah, to see Bach's development from around 15 to 18 years old is this great explosion of mastery. And it's kind of mysterious where that all came from. And the works are, I think they're not known to the audience because they're difficult for the performer. They're very difficult to perform both technically and overall musically because they require a lot of study of contemporary sources. And so I think that for a lot of Bach players and especially a lot of Baroque musicians, these early years of Bach, they're like a blind spot. They require a lot of specialized knowledge and practice and research. And so for me, that makes them incredibly fascinating because they're incredibly rewarding once you finally figure out the spirit behind it. Yeah, they make for wonderful music.
Is it fair to say then that the earlier pieces, maybe because there's a certain rawness and youthfulness to them, that they're a little harder to unpack technically and musically as than his later works?
Yes, that's precisely what I'm saying. They are idiosyncratic in a way, or almost personal in a way that stands in contrast to the maybe more universal outlook of the mature Bach. Something like the Art of Fugue, which I think I actually played on Downtown Chamber Series a couple of years ago. That is much simpler technically to play than almost any of the earlier works. And it's not that it doesn't have a style. It's very rooted in the German and the North German organ school of florid counterpoint. But it certainly doesn't mimic and imitate the virtuosic Italian style or the French suite style, like as directly as the earlier compositions that I'll be playing.
Is the idiosyncrasy, I want to hone in on that, is the idiosyncrasy you're talking about in these early works, is that a break from tradition that came before, or is it perhaps idiosyncratic to him, like as a player? I mean, help me understand that a little bit more, the idiosyncrasy.
Sure. Yeah, it's very idiosyncratic to him as a player. He had a technique just based on the text of his music. He had a technique that allowed him to rise above almost any difficulty that any musical difficulty that the text could produce. So when you're looking at that, you just think about his hands. I mean, it's he could really play anything. Like his technique was so formidable that um it 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 sort of begets this type of spirit that is very, very singular. It's a very singular thing. I mean, I could talk about where it came from. So there's one famous anecdote. So the history of Bach is like this: he was 10 years old and was orphaned. His parents died in 1695 when he was 10 years old, and then he went to live with his older brother in Ordruf until 15 years old. Now, the famous story about the Moonlight manuscript is that there was this lattice cupboard, and Bach apparently went down after bedtime or whatever when he wasn't supposed to, and put his little hands through the lattice and rolled up the music, and then pulled it out through the lattice cupboard, and then copied it by candlelight. And his brother found this and apparently took it away from him. Now we think that, oh, that was the story of a mean brother or something like that, but it actually had a more practical function, which was that music in those days was proprietary, meaning that there was a line of who was allowed to copy what, and any sort of unauthorized copy was like a copyright infringement, right? So this shows you sort of how ambitious the young Bach, the 10 to 15-year-old Bach was. So by the time that Bach leaves Ohrdruf, he goes to I think Lüneburg from about 15 to 18, and it's not quite sure what he did there. He was singing. He was a professional singer. His voice had probably changed, so he was a professional, either a baritone or a tenor or something like that. By the time he gets his first job in Arnstadt, these two manuscripts arrive. They're called the Müller manuscript and the Andreas Bach book. And these are some of the earliest manuscripts that we have of Bach's works, and they contain compositions from Italian, French, German masters, and a bunch of compositions by Bach. And already there, so this is already like 18, 19-year-old Bach, we see that he's completely mastered the Italian style and the French style and the North German organ style. And it's sort of like, it's that type of ambitious copying that happened. That same boy that was stealing music out of the cupboard, so ambitious, and the eternal student that he had learned, not only learned how to imitate, but almost to usurp the styles of the great Italians and French composers.
Okay, so speaking of the French composers, you're pairing him with Rameau. And I think of Rameau as being this very cosmopolitan composer, Parisian, very commercially successful composer. So first of all, why did you choose to do this work in particular to highlight a contrast between these two?
Yeah, so I'm playing the first book, the Premier Livre of Rameau, and it comes from the same period, maybe a few years later, 1706. So pretty much all the Bach I'm playing is from 1704. But they were exactly the same age. So I believe Rameau was 2 years Bach's senior. So this would have been also the 19-year-old Rameau. So it's a program of young, ambitious gentlemen.
Right? Okay, so you're saying that Bach had absorbed been handed down these different lineages and sort of absorbed them and was making his own. How was Rameau's education different?
All that I could say about the majority of French and Italian composers, and maybe for that matter, the majority of composers that weren't Bach, is that they didn't make as much an effort as Bach did to master the other styles. So we don't see examples of. I would be happily corrected if I welcome correction if this is not true, but I'm pretty sure we don't see examples of French composers really writing in sort of the Dutch style or the Italian style. Vivaldi, he writes the Italian concerto style over and over and over again throughout his career, and he doesn't delve into the French overture style as far as I know. But that was certainly on Bach's radar when he was already a teenager, was to say, I want to know, I want to be able to play in all styles. I want to see what the French are doing, what the Italians are doing, what all of my German predecessors have done. and I want to be able to write in all of those styles. Um, so that's what makes Bach sort of Bach. And if he's not your favorite composer, you certainly can't say that he isn't the most important composer, because around, say, 1735, he makes his second publication in music, and this is a collection of two works, the Italian Concerto and the French Overture, and these are sort of like the last words in the Italian style and the French style from a German composer. Now, this is sort of mind-boggling in art. It's like saying, I don't know, Shakespeare writing a play in French that's better than Moliere, and also publishing 100 sonnets that are better than Petrarch's in Italian. That kind of achievement is just like unparalleled in any other genre. So, and here it is, Bach doing the same thing in the Italian and French styles, 30 years, yeah, 30, about 30 years earlier in his career. You could see him, So yeah, that's the principle of the program, by the way. The first half is French music, and the second half is Italian music, all by Bach.
Oftentimes, I think especially in the 21st century, we have exposure to all these different kinds of sounds. Like our ears are opened up to electronic sounds, or open to every genre of music at the touch of a finger. And so oftentimes when we think about Western classical music, the quality of sound is actually quite similar, right? And so oftentimes at least in my opinion, we associate things, we categorize things differently because they sound radically different. But to a person coming to Rameau and Bach, they're the same instrument or a similar instrument. There's like a lot of commonalities there. But what is the thing that we might miss as modern audiences that make them so different?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's no better truly innovator in the sound world than Bach. I mean, he was really he was not an artist per se looking to express himself. He was really in the business of making music. And so when something comes around, something comes about in Europe that is all of a sudden a genuine musical instrument, he writes for it and exposes it to every possible treatment that it can have. So, for example, the transverse flute comes on the scene midway through Bach's career, and all of a sudden, this is a new instrument. So he just writes exhaustively for the instrument, not because he's inspired by the sound of the flute or something like that, but because this is the new sound, and so he has to know every single thing about this instrument. We see him doing it obviously through his organ music. That was like a huge thing. If you really are following the organ music closely, you'll notice that he's writing very specifically for specific organs. Certain pieces that have a low B, that's the B below cello C,
Mm-hmm.
not on 99% of the organs in the world. So that means that he was specifically writing for this very fancy organ that had this extra large pipe, with harpsichords, the lute harpsichord, which is a type of harpsichord that plucks the strings sort of like
Mm-hmm.
to mimic the sound of a lute, like a gut string. As soon as this comes about, Bach is in Weimar around 1714. He goes, this is a new instrument. I need to write something for this. So he's an absolute innovator without really being an innovator. I mean, he's just modern. He's just concurrent with the sound. So of course, when you play the lute harpsichord to someone in the 21st century, it sounds old. But when all of a sudden you're first hearing this instrument in 1713 and you've never heard it your entire life, you go, that sounds as new as, a theremin to someone who's never heard electronic music. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk, before we wrap up, I want to talk about the sort of legacies of these two composers. And so I think it's fair to say, unless you're an aficionado of early music, Rameau is not a composer that you hear that often on concerts. But his great legacy, I think, is in the theoretical works, the way he thought about music. He is sort of a father of modern musical theory, the way we think about it in today's terms. And Bach expressed himself. I think it's fair to say he expressed his theoretical innovations through his pedagogical works and through the canonical works that he is known for.
I think we can comfortably say that Bach was uncomfortable, or certainly not at ease, expressing himself with words. He declined several times to give a written statement on sort of what his art was all about. And the only time we have very little in terms of biographical statements, or certainly autobiographical statements about Bach. And the only time that we sort of see him rushing to maybe defend his art is through the words of another person, when the famous critic Scheibe sort of attacked him for being too florid, too ornamental, or something like that. And he sort of has a ghostwriter. You can see him sitting on the shoulder of this ghostwriter saying, oh, you should put this in there and that in there. But other than that, you really don't ever see any statements from Bach about his art. There's an early statement where he says that his goal in music is to create a well-regulated church music to the glory of God. That's about all we have. But everything is in the music. It's really in the music. I mean, his deep Christian faith is in the music, through the absolute elucidation of tone painting and the way he makes the text come alive. His theoretical work is obviously so prominent. I know that Rameau published this famous treatise on harmony, I think in 1723, while Bach would have published the Well-Tempered Clavier just the year before, which shows how much just a little bit quicker Bach was. Now, of course, it's not quite the same thing, but this is really a victory, a theoretical victory that doesn't use any words. Rameau's very important, of course, but yeah, it's not Bach's style to use words. He uses tones. Why that
Yeah.
is, I don't know. It's
I love that. Everything's in the music. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Everything's in the music. So we hope you'll come and join us to hear Evan's interpretation of the early period of Bach and Rameau to some degree. The concerts again are January 4th and 5th, Saturday and Sunday, and they will be at the Epic 1964 building in downtown Phoenix, the Punch Card building, with an exhibition by the Phoenix-based artist Robert Springer. Concert ticket information will be in the link below. Thank you, Evan, for joining us again. We look forward to seeing you soon.